How to change a U-joint. Today I'm going to show you how to change a U-joint on an axle shaft and a drive shaft as well. Here's some of the tools that we might use today. So you'll find a U-joint in a few different places. One of them is your rear drive shaft if you have a rear wheel drive vehicle. You'll also find U-joints on your front drive shaft if you have a four-wheel drive. And if you have a four-wheel drive vehicle, you'll find U-joints on your front axle shafts on the left and right side. To know if you need to replace your U-joints, you can check them by hand. You'll chalk the vehicle, put it in neutral, and then check your U-joints by moving them up or down. You can also use leverage from a pry bar to check for play, but you'll know these are going out if you have a vibration in your driveline or a chirping sound. It'll typically be high pitch, especially when coming from the front axle shafts. If you want to know what a bad U-joint looks like, this is it. Typically, these needle bearings, which are held inside the cap, will dry out from no grease or water intrusion. And when that happens, the needle bearings will grind themselves into a pulp and create a loose cap on your U-joint. So first, I'm going to show you how to change a U-joint on an axle shaft. If you need to know how to remove an axle shaft or a drive shaft, check that drawer below where creators stuff their secrets and links. But before we get started on that, if you had as much fun as my Jeep does on the rocks, hit the like button. And if you're ready for more trails, tales, and off-road fails, subscribe and join the convoy. BleepinJeep has over 1,321 videos and we upload at least once a week. For this first U-joint, I'll show you how to change it using a vise. If you don't have a vise, just wait until the drive shaft U-joint. This axle shaft U-joint has these inner C-clips that need to be removed. You can do that using a simple flat-bladed screwdriver. You're just going to pop them out. Watch out, you might want to wear some safety glasses and pop the other side out as well. Next, you'll set this thing up in the vise. You don't want it to be clamped down, just loose in the vise. Find a big hammer, and we're going to smack very firmly right there. If it doesn't come out on the first try, don't worry. Just give it a few more smacks, and then you're going to pull the cap using some pliers. Then we'll flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Now you can pull the two pieces apart. You can also remove the other cap. And then you'll need to do the same for the other half of the U-joint. Remove the two clips. Very carefully. Watch your eyeballs. You'll do the same thing here. Don't tighten it down in the vise. And you're going to smack the edge here. This little thing is a dust shield. We'll straighten that back out. It's very hard to go around it. But you're going to do the same thing with a hammer. Hammer one cap out. Hammer the other cap out. And then you'll be able to take the cross section out of the axle shaft. This little dust cap, you can take it off or you can just bend it back straight. It's pretty easy to do so. Next up, we're going to make sure that there's no burrs. You can see that burr right on the edge there, and we want to take care of that before we put a new U-joint in. To do that, we're going to use a file and just file the edge, not the whole thing. You don't want to open this hole up. You just want to file that edge where the burr is on the corner. So make sure to use your file at an angle and just hit that edge until it's nice and smooth and round. You want to make sure that this thing is round, especially in a four-wheel drive application, because if the U-joint is bad and has been bad, it could have ovaled out the ears on the axle. So I prefer to use Spicer U-joints. They are what the factory uses, and they are the best other than a few aftermarket applications which are very high dollar, but Spicer does make a good product. Next, we're just going to clean up the mating surfaces. To do that, use some brake cleaner and a rag. Make sure there's no burrs, make sure everything's nice and clean. And then we're going to use some lube and lubricate the inner surfaces, making sure that everything just slides in nice and smooth. Next step, we're going to take both caps off, two caps, opposite sides of each other, making sure that you do not lose any of the needle bearings on the inside. You're going to slide this cross into the U-joint. Now double check that all your needle bearings are still in place. Those things do like to fall out, and you're going to very carefully slide that down over the cross. And actually you're sliding the cross up into it. You're going to tap that just about halfway in The reason being is you want to have a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to the other side. Let me show you. So we're going to flip this over and we're going to place the other cap in here very carefully, making sure not to lose any of those needle bearings. Tap it down about halfway, and then you're going to slide this thing up and down to make sure that you didn't lose any of the needle bearings, and if you did, it won't go all the way up or down. It'll kind of get stuck. So now we're going to flip this thing back over, hammer that other cap all the way down, and next we're going to look and make sure that we've got enough room to install these C-clips. The C-clip goes right in that groove. More than likely, you're not going to have enough room. You need to tap it up one direction or the other to install the first C-clip. So in this instance, we're tapping up until that C-clip is capable of sliding into the groove. We'll come back and check that later. Now we're going to tap down the other direction until we can get the other C-clip into its groove. It's a very tight tolerance here. Once that C-clip is in its groove, we're going to double check with a flat-bladed screwdriver and just make sure that that thing is fully seated. Next, we'll take off the other two caps, making sure not to drop the needle bearings. Then we'll rotate this thing upward. Next, we'll slide on the other portion of the axle shaft very carefully. We're going to slip it down, put one cap on, and slide the axle shaft up into the cap. Carefully hammer that down just about halfway, making sure not to lose any of those needle bearings. Flip it over, and we'll do the same process. Don't lose any needle bearings. Put the cap on. Make sure it slides onto the trunnion. We're going to hammer that down just a little ways and then check to make sure that everything is good before we continue. If perhaps you do get one of those needle bearings that turns sideways in there, these caps won't seat fully and you'll notice right away. So make sure not to smash too hard, otherwise you'll end up with a broken needle bearing down in there and it won't last very long. Now let's put the two remaining clips into place. First the one, and then you'll hammer on the other side to make room for the other clip. Slide that clip into place whenever you have the clearance, and then use a flat-bladed screwdriver to make sure that they are fully seated on both sides. Now this next step is something a lot of people miss. You can see how tight that U-joint is initially. It's very simple. You just take a hammer and smack on all four sides. What this is going to do is just even everything out and make sure that nothing is bound up. You can see how nice and smooth it is now. That's it, you're done. Now we've shown you how to change a U-joint on an axle shaft using a vise. Now let's show you how to change a U-joint on a drive shaft using a socket and a few simple tools. In fact, here's all the tools we'll be using for this one. The drive shaft U-joint is a little different in that the clips are on the outside edges instead of on the inside. So to help with this, we're going to use a little bit of lubricant just to loosen things up. You can do this a couple days in advance if you've got a lot of rust issues on your drive shaft. Next, we're going to remove those internal clips using a pair of needle nose pliers. It's pretty simple. Just grab onto it, squeeze, and pull it out. We're going to rotate that and move on to the other three. And you might have some issue depending on how long that's been in there. You can take a little flat-bladed screwdriver or a punch, a chisel, and just break it free. It won't take much. And then go back to your needle nose and it'll usually come right out. Just watch your eyeballs. Move on to 3 and 4, same thing. Remove all of the internal clips. Now we're going to move on to our socket. You'll need one socket that's internal surface is bigger than the cap itself, and then one socket that will fit inside, and we're going to use that to punch it out. So make sure that you're good and comfortable, everything is flat. Put that big socket on the bottom and the smaller socket on top, and we're just going to drive it out like that with one good smack. Sometimes they're a little rusty, might require multiple smacks, but you get the idea. Then we're going to remove the cap, We're going to pivot the yoke off of there. Sometimes you'll have to drive that other cap out the other side of the yoke, but either way, just get those two caps off and the yoke off. Set those aside, and now it's the same procedure for the other two caps. In this case, it didn't come all the way out, so we'll use a pair of channel locks to pull that cap. Then carefully remove the cross of the U-joint. Now I prefer to use non-greasable U-joints like this one, but they do also make greasable U-joints like so. However, they are much weaker, especially for off-roading purposes, because they have grease channels drilled throughout the U-joint. They also make greasable cap U-joints, which can be helpful in tight situations. But I'm just going to stick with non-greasable. Next, let's make sure the C-clip channels on the tube yoke are free of dirt and debris, so we're going to clean that out and then wipe it down. Once again, check for burrs. Using a file, we're going to file off those burrs, but remember to keep this at an angle. You don't want to open the hole up, you just want to get those burrs off of the very edge. Alright, nice and clean. This part of the U-joint is called the journal cross, and we're going to stick that up in here and make sure, once again, just like we did on the axle shaft U-joint, that we don't lose any of the bearings. These little needle bearings can be tricky and fall out sometimes. So give that a couple smacks, then turn it over, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side, just making sure that everything goes in smoothly, we don't lose any of those needle bearings, and that the cross slides up and down, making sure that none of those needle bearings have fallen into the bottom of the cap. Now take your smaller socket. You can tell that this one has been used for this purpose quite a lot, as the top is all beaten up. But we're going to make sure that this cap goes down just far enough to see the groove where the clip is going to reside. Once you get that pushed down far enough, just lay your clip on top. Use some pliers to squeeze that together and pop inside. You'll notice that the clip didn't fully seat, so you'll always want to double check by using your socket and smacking it around a little bit. Then double check to make sure that it did seat fully into the groove. Now we're going to turn that over, and we're going to use that same small socket and beat the cap down just far enough to see this groove on the other side. Once again, take that clip, clip it into place, smack it a couple times with the socket, and you can double check also with a screwdriver or a chisel. Now the other side of the drive shaft is basically the exact same procedure. We're just going to do the same steps. One thing I would like to talk about is that a drive shaft is typically a lot thinner, so that is why I would choose to use this socket method without the vise. You don't want to be putting your drive shaft into a vise and squeezing it too hard. There's also a lot of surfaces that need to be pristine, like the one on the left here is for a seal. You don't want to mar that up in a vise. So that's why this method of replacing your U-joints with a socket comes in handy, specifically when doing U-joints on a drive shaft, but also if you're doing U-joints out on the trail, whether it be a drive shaft or an axle shaft, if you don't have a vise, this can come in really handy. You can use a flat rock or just the ground or anything really that you can find to use as a work surface like a tailgate, then use the sockets as your smashing device. And it helps if you have a hammer, but heck, I've even used a rock that I've found on the side of the trail when changing U-joints in a pinch. Once again, we're going to give this a good smack on all four sides to loosen everything up. Then make sure that it wiggles and jiggles. Now, if you need to change the U-joint on the other end of the drive shaft, it's exactly the same process, just with 2 steps instead of 4. And then the other 2 caps fit in a yoke, just like so, and you'll use U-bolts that came off, or straps if it came with it, to put it back together. And that's how you change the U-joints on an axle shaft and a drive shaft. Alright, it's time to shift into park and wrap up this adventure. Until next time, keep the rubber side down and the Jeep wave strong. I'll see you on the trail.